Why shame died and society is dying with it. There was a time when shame was a compass. It didn't just punish us, it guided us. It was a mirror that showed us what kind of person we were becoming and asked, is this who you truly want to be? But today, shame is practically extinct. We've declared it toxic, outdated, repressive. We've buried it under layers of irony, deflection, and self-affirmation. And in doing so, we've lost one of the most powerful forces that once tethered society to a moral center. Think about that for a moment. What if the death of shame didn't liberate us, but unmoored us? What if, in killing shame, we also killed the very thing that held our culture to a standard of decency, humility, and accountability? This is where the story begins, not with judgment, but with truth. If we look around honestly at politics, social media, entertainment, education, and even our own habits, we see a world where people no longer feel shame for what was once considered disgraceful. We boast about what we used to hide. We flaunt behavior that once caused us to reflect. We confuse exposure with empowerment and boldness with virtue. It's not that we've become more honest. It's that we've become numb. And that numbness has consequences.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Shame isn't inherently bad. Like fire, it can destroy you, but it can also purify. It can burn, yes, but it can also illuminate. At its best, shame isn't about humiliation, it's about alignment. It tells you when you've betrayed your values. It reminds you that your actions affect others, that morality isn't just a private matter, and that society functions best when individuals hold themselves to standards higher than personal convenience. But we've replaced those standards with slogans. Live your truth, no regrets. You do you. These mantras sound empowering, but they're often masks for deeper avoidance. Because freedom without responsibility is not liberation, it's collapse. Let's ask a hard question. Why did shame die? What changed in us, in our culture, that made shame intolerable? One answer is that we confused shame with shaming. Public humiliation, bullying, cancel culture, these are weapons, not wisdom. And yes, they're dangerous. But in trying to protect ourselves from cruelty, we also threw away introspection. We made the internal experience of guilt feel like an enemy instead of a teacher. We told ourselves that feeling bad was bad, and so we stopped listening to one of the most ancient signals of the human soul. Here's the paradox. We still feel shame, but we've lost the language to process it. We scroll through curated lives online, compare ourselves, feel empty, and then swipe it all away with a dopamine hit. We no longer ask, what does this say about me? Instead, we ask, how can I avoid this feeling? But avoidance doesn't erase shame. It buries it. And what's buried becomes toxic. That toxicity leaks out in anxiety, in addiction, in rage, in loneliness. We think we're escaping shame, but in truth, we're letting it silently erode our lives because we've lost the tools to face it. We need to remember something ancient. Shame, when approached wisely, is a map. It shows us where we've gone off course. It's the voice that says, you're better than this. And we need that voice, not to condemn us, but to reclaim us. Because without shame, there's no integrity. And without integrity, there's no trust. And without trust, society dies, not in a loud explosion, but in a slow, invisible unraveling. People stop believing in each other. Institutions lose credibility. Relationships become transactional. And the soul, both personal and collective, begins to fracture. Imagine a world where no one feels shame for lying, cheating, exploiting, or betraying. A world where every action is justified, every desire is validated, and every mistake is reframed as empowerment. That world is not free, it's frightening. Because when no one feels shame, no one feels accountable. And without accountability, justice becomes performative, leadership becomes corrupt, and love becomes hollow. That's not progress. That's decay in disguise. But here's where the deep thinkers, the philosophers, the artists, the visionaries come in. They understand that shame isn't a glitch in the human experience. It's a signal, a sacred discomfort. It's the tension between who we are and who we could be. And we ignore it at our peril. The death of shame isn't a cultural victory. It's a spiritual crisis. And until we recover the wisdom to feel shame without being destroyed by it, we will continue to drift as individuals and as a civilization. You might be wondering, so what do we do with this? Do we just go back to a world of guilt and repression? No. This isn't about returning to a past of moral suffocation. It's about creating a future of moral clarity, a future where shame is no longer weaponized, but humanized, where it becomes a bridge, not a wall, where it calls us back to our better selves instead of locking us in self-hate. Let me ask you this. What's something you've done that still haunts you, not because someone punished you, but because you knew deep down you betrayed your own values? What if that pain isn't your enemy? What if it's your soul calling you back to alignment? Shame didn't die because we evolved beyond it. It died because we stopped listening. And if we want to live in a world that values truth, decency, and connection, we need to resurrect it, not as a weapon, but as a guide. The age of narcissism, when self-worship replaced self-reflection, something shifted in the human psyche when we stopped asking, "Am I living rightly?" and replaced it with, "Am I being seen?" The moment we turned our gaze outward not as a means of connection, but as a mirror for validation, we entered a new era, the age of narcissism. And the consequences are more than cultural, they're existential. Because when self-worship replaces self-reflection, the soul doesn't grow, it swells, not in depth, but in illusion. We become inflated, not enlightened. And in that inflation, we lose the very thing shame once protected, our ability to see ourselves clearly. In the past, shame held a mirror to our actions. It asked to stop, consider, and even repent. It wasn't always gentle, but it was honest. It was rooted in a kind of sacred accountability. But as shame disappeared, something had to fill that void. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the vacuum left by shame was quickly filled by ego. Not the kind of ego that gives us confidence and structure, but the false self, the one built on likes, applause, curated images, and the endless pursuit of being perceived as enough. We traded moral clarity for aesthetic identity. We no longer ask, "Am I good?" We ask, "Do I look good? Do I sound smart? Do I seem impressive?" Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube didn't cause this shift, they amplified it. They gave us the perfect tools to broadcast identity while bypassing introspection. We became our own PR firms, constantly managing optics, branding ourselves not as people but as products. And in the process, we learned to perform emotions instead of feeling them, to posture virtues instead of practicing them. We began to believe that vulnerability was a caption, not a confrontation with the self. That growth was a trend. That authenticity meant being raw strategically, only when it paid off. But here's the real tragedy. In the age of narcissism, the self is no longer a mystery to be explored, it's a stage to be decorated. And the deeper question, who am I, really, gets drowned out by metrics, mirrors, and noise. We confuse visibility with value. We assume being seen is the same as being known. But being known requires something terrifying: honesty. And honesty often comes with shame. The moment you see yourself clearly, without filters or hashtags or applause, you might not like what you see. You might feel ashamed. And that's the very moment our culture tells you, don't go there, don't feel that. You're perfect as you are. But what if that message isn't love? What if it's abandonment in disguise? What if true love for yourself and for others begins with the courage to feel shame without being destroyed by it? What if shame, in small doses, is the very medicine we need to deflate the ego and return to something real, something human? In a world of narcissistic inflation, shame is not a virus, it's a vaccine. It inoculates us against delusion. It brings us back to earth. It reminds us that being seen is not the same as being worthy, and being worthy has nothing to do with performance. Let me ask you a question that goes deeper than self-esteem. When was the last time you looked at your own life, your relationships, your motives, your habits, and didn't try to justify them, but just told yourself the truth? No spin, no branding, just truth. It's rare, isn't it? Because truth without shame is hollow, and shame without truth is cruel. But when you hold them together, shame and truth, that's when something sacred happens. That's when transformation begins. The age of narcissism doesn't just distort individuals, it warps entire systems. Leaders who can't feel shame become tyrants. Celebrities who can't reflect become idols with empty souls. Algorithms that reward narcissism over nuance create echo chambers of ego. And we, the people, consume it all, numbed by it, addicted to it, shaped by it until we no longer know the difference between self-expression and self-obsession. But you, if you're still watching, if you're still thinking, you are the exception. You're not here to be seen. You're here to see. And that means reclaiming the lost art of self-reflection. It means letting shame back in, not as your master, but as your mirror. Because only through that mirror can we pierce the illusion of narcissism and find the real self waiting underneath. And maybe that's the most radical thing you can do today. Not show the world a better version of yourself, but become a better version silently, humbly, honestly. Not for applause, not for followers, but because something inside you still remembers that integrity matters more than image. That truth matters more than trend. And that a life without shame might be easy, but it's also empty. The collapse of character, what happens when no one is ashamed to be corrupt. If there is one silent catastrophe unraveling the fabric of our civilization, it is the collapse of character. This isn't something you can measure in GDP or track in an algorithm. It doesn't scream from the headlines, and yet its fingerprints are on every scandal, every broken institution, every betrayal of public trust. And at the center of this collapse is a terrifying truth. We no longer expect people to be ashamed of corruption, not in politics, not in business, not even in our personal lives. In fact, we often reward it. We admire the cunning, the manipulative, the shameless. We celebrate those who win by any means necessary. And we look away from the cost. But here's the question that cuts through the noise. What happens to a society when no one is ashamed to be corrupt anymore? Character used to mean something. It was a person's invisible wealth, the sum of their choices, their sacrifices, the quiet integrity they maintained when no one was watching. It was earned slowly and lost quickly. But today, character has been replaced with charisma. Integrity has been replaced with influence. And shame, the internal compass that once whispered, "This is wrong," has been muted by applause, by tribalism, by the rationalization that everyone else is doing it. We built a culture where success excuses anything. If someone lies, cheats, or exploits others but still wins, still gets the deal, the votes, the followers, we don't call it evil. We call it strategy. We call it hustle. And then we wonder why nothing feels sacred anymore. We used to look at corruption and feel indignation. Now we often feel envy. We say things like, well, if I had the chance, I'd do the same. That's not just moral fatigue, it's moral collapse. Because once you stop believing in the value of character, you stop believing that goodness matters. And when goodness doesn't matter, shame becomes irrelevant. Why feel ashamed for doing something wrong, when wrong no longer means anything? That's the terrifying root of it. If there is no shame in corruption, there can be no trust. And without trust, no society can survive. Corruption isn't just about bribes or backroom deals. It's about a slow erosion of the soul. It happens every time someone chooses comfort over conscience. Every time someone lies to avoid consequences. Every time we tolerate cruelty for the sake of convenience. And the more we normalize that, the more we shrug and say that's just how the world works, the more we participate in our own decay. Because corruption doesn't begin in governments or corporations. It begins in the human heart, mine, yours, ours, and spreads like a disease when unexamined. You don't need to be a politician or a CEO to feel this. You've seen it in friendships where loyalty was faked, in relationships where manipulation replaced honesty, in workplaces where the person who played the game better got ahead, even if they stepped on others to do it. And the worst part is, often no one feels ashamed. They feel entitled. They tell themselves a story where they're the hero. That's the final death of shame, when we not only betray our values, but rewrite the script to make it look noble. So let me ask you a question that might sting. Have you ever done something you knew was wrong, but justified it because you got what you wanted? Did you feel ashamed? Or did you suppress it? Tell yourself everyone else would have done the same. That moment, that internal negotiation, that's where character is built or broken. And it's in those small, private decisions that the fate of a culture is written. Because character doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes one compromise at a time, one ignored shame signal at a time, one rationalization at a time. And eventually you wake up in a world where corruption isn't shocking, it's expected. Where lies don't cost you anything, they buy you power. Where apologies are PR tactics, not genuine remorse. Where the worst people rise to the top because the best people were too exhausted or too afraid to stand for something real. But here's the radical truth: the collapse of character can be reversed. Not by policies, not by elections, not by viral outrage, but by you, by me, by each of us deciding that shame isn't our enemy, it's our ally. That feeling bad about doing bad things is healthy. That guilt is not weakness. It's the first sign of moral life. That to rebuild character, we must first be willing to feel again, to feel the weight of our choices, the impact of our actions, the truth of our conscience. You want to change the world? Start by refusing to celebrate what should be condemned. Start by holding yourself to the standard you wish others would live by. Start by letting shame do its sacred work, not to crush you, but to cleanse you. Because when enough people choose character over charisma, integrity over influence, and truth over tribalism, the collapse becomes a resurrection. The resurrection of conscience, how reclaiming shame can save what's left of us. There's a quiet revolution waiting to happen in the hearts of those who are still capable of feeling. It won't start with politicians or celebrities or influencers. It will start with the individual, with you, in a moment of silence when no one is watching, and you ask yourself the oldest question of all: am I living in alignment with what I know to be true? This is the resurrection of conscience. And it begins when we stop running from shame and start listening to it again, not as a voice of destruction, but as the whisper of the soul calling us home. We've been taught to fear shame, to pathologize it, to cast it out like an emotional parasite. But what if shame is not the problem? What if the problem is how we've misunderstood it? Shame, in its purest form, is not there to punish you. It's there to protect you from becoming someone you're not proud to be. It's the internal guardian of your values. And when it shows up, when you feel that sting in your chest, that tightening in your gut, it's not trying to destroy your self-esteem. It's trying to wake you up. It's saying, this isn't who you are. That's not cruelty. That's conscience. And a life without it is not freedom. It's moral death. The moment we stopped trusting shame, we stopped trusting conscience. We began to believe that if something felt bad, it must be toxic. But conscience should feel heavy sometimes. That weight is what anchors us to reality. It's what keeps us from drifting into narcissism, cowardice, and corruption. But the resurrection of conscience doesn't happen in public. It happens in solitude, in reflection. When you finally turn off the noise, the validation-seeking, the performance, and ask, what am I pretending not to know? And then you listen, really listen, to the part of you that still remembers what it feels like to be aligned. This is not about perfection. It's about alignment. It's about learning how to feel shame without letting it harden into self-hate. It's about turning toward the discomfort instead of away from it. Because on the other side of that discomfort is clarity. And clarity is power. Not the flashy kind, but the kind that lets you sleep at night. The kind that lets you look someone in the eye and know you told the truth. The kind that doesn't need applause, because it has peace. You may be asking, but how do I begin? I've gone too far, made too many mistakes. That's the beauty of conscience. It never stops speaking. Even when you've silenced it for years, it waits, patiently. And the moment you stop justifying and start listening, it returns. Not to shame you in the toxic sense, but to restore you. To reintroduce you to the person you were before the world told you to pretend. Before you learned to fake strength. Before you turned authenticity into a brand. So ask yourself now, what would it look like to live a life where you don't have to hide anything? Not because you're perfect, but because you've integrated your failures. Where shame isn't something you fear, but something you use like a compass. Can you imagine how powerful that would be? How many lies you could stop telling? How many masks you could finally put down? This is how shame becomes sacred again. When it moves from being a weapon of humiliation to a mirror of transformation. When it stops being about what others think and starts being about what you know. And when that happens, when enough people reclaim shame as part of their moral vocabulary, something incredible shifts. We begin to trust each other again. We begin to build again. We begin to heal. Because the truth is, society isn't dying because people make mistakes. It's dying because people no longer feel bad when they do. But that can change one conscience at a time, one honest moment at a time, one courageous act of self-reflection at a time. So, if you remember nothing else from this journey, remember this. Shame, when guided by truth and humility, is not your enemy. It's your invitation to become the person you were always meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us accept that invitation, we can save what's left of us and build something worth being proud of again.